Chapter 3, wherein Harris introduces me to work, and I meet Ernie. The voices seem to come from far away, muffled and through a hissing ring. He doesn't know things, Harris. You have to go slow with him. Well, how in the hell was I supposed to know he'd walk right up Vivian's butt? Smack. Watch the swearing. Well, what could he expect? Everybody knows Vivian kicks and doesn't like anybody around her rear end. That's just it, Harris. He doesn't know. He's from the city. I could recognize voices now, though I hadn't opened my eyes. It was Claire. He doesn't know anything about farms, the poor dear. And what a way to start, getting kicked by Vivian. Things were still blurred in my thinking. Somebody named Vivian had apparently kicked me. Hard. I made a mental note never to cross her again. Whoever this Vivian was, she had a very direct form of criticism. It was, however, strange that she would hide out in the darkness in the back of the barn next to a pool of cow crap, waiting to kick the bejesus out of people. I opened my eyes. I was in the small dining area next to the kitchen, lying on my back on the table with something wet and white over my head and eyes. I couldn't see anything. See? Harris asked. He ain't dead. He's moving. Look at that. A big damn fuss over nothing. Smack. If you don't stop swearing, I'll take a switch to you. Glennis's voice. I raised a hand and felt a damp cloth on my forehead and face. At that moment, the cloth was lifted away, and I was looking up at Claire and Glennis. Harris stood down by my feet. Everybody but Harris had worried looks on their faces, and I tried to smile. Are you all right? Claire asked. I hurt. I touched my forehead where there was a lump that felt as big as a grapefruit. Yes, I know. Vivian kicked you. It always hurts when Vivian kicks you. Who's Vivian, and why doesn't she like me? Claire smiled. Vivian is a cow, dear, and she doesn't like anybody. I believe she'd kick herself if she could figure out how to do it. Why doesn't somebody kick her back? Harris snorted. I tried that once and she damn near killed me. Smack. Well, she did. I'm just saying that what happened. You don't gotta hit me for every damn little thing. Smack. It's the swearing, dear. You have to do something about it. Harris turned to me. You about ready to quit laying around? We're wasting daylight. I tried to sit up, but Claire held me down. Not yet. Vivian caught you on the top of the head pretty hard. You take it easy for a little while. I'll get you some pie and a glass of milk, and then we'll see. Actually, my head didn't hurt as much as my crotch, but I couldn't tell her that, so I just nodded. Thank you. Well, for God's sake, you're going to give him pie for a little thing like that? Harris shook his head. Hell, I busted a leg and nobody gave me pie. I'll go out there and let that old bat kick me all day long if you give me pie for it. The last words were raising in tone because Claire had finally had enough, and she grabbed Harris and pulled him across the kitchen counter and pounded on his butt with a steel ladle. He wailed a bit, but even I knew he was faking it, and could tell that the whipping was having no real effect. He ran outside as she dropped him. I rolled to a sitting position and resisted grabbing my groin, and sat quietly at the table eating pie, which had a delicious tang that almost made the pain go away. You play slowly today, Claire told me as she and Glennis moved to the back door with buckets, headed for the barn. Don't let Harris talk you into anything wild. I won't. And the thing was, I really believed it. I really meant to go easy, take it slow, but as soon as they were out of the house, Harris came in and stood next to me, fidgeting impatiently. Come on, we've got lots to do. I followed him out, wiping the milk mustache off my upper lip, curious about the farm. The truth was, I hadn't seen it during the daylight and had no knowledge of what was there. Harris led off, headed for the barn, where they were still milking. The barn lay about 50 yards from the house and was made of old hewn timbers with a slanted corrugated metal roof. To the right, on the way to the barn, was a board-sided granary, and attached to one wall of the granary was the chicken coop. In front of the coop was a fenced pen, and the pen was full of white young chickens, what seemed to be hundreds of them. There were other kinds of chickens loose all across the yard, 50 or so, pecking at the grass and scratching, and several dozen chicks following different hens, mimicking their mothers. The loose chickens were mixed red and black and spotted white, some with funny feathers on their heads that looked like pom-poms. Various machines were lined up in a row beyond the chicken pen. Some I didn't recognize yet, a mower, rake, seeder, cultivator, but I knew what the tractor was, an old green John Deere, and there was a tired-looking, caving-in truck with the Ford emblem on the radiator grill. Everywhere there seemed to be odd bits of junk and old machinery, mechanical arms that stuck up in the air, 2 old bicycles, or perhaps 3 or 4 old bicycles, it was hard to tell, rusting rolls of fencing, steel pipe, bits and pieces of old cars. It was like a junkyard. Attached to the side of the barn were wooden pig pens, which seemed to be full of living boulders, enormous pigs that would have walked through the flimsy boards whenever they wished, or so it looked. And I was just going to ask Harris what kept them in when he stopped dead. Oh no! I had been following him closely and bumped into him when he stopped. He was scanning the yard and the area around the chickens, looking toward the top of the granary roof, which was to our right, and peering in and under the machinery. "What's the matter?" I asked. "I don't see him." By this time I had figured Harris was pretty much invulnerable. It didn't seem that anything could harm him, but he was clearly concerned, and I felt his uncertainty infect me. The hair went up on my neck. "Don't see who?" "Ernie. I don't see Ernie. He ain't good when you can't see him." "Who," I looked around quickly, "is Ernie?" But Harris wasn't listening. He kept scanning the yard and started walking toward the barn, walking so fast I almost had to jog to catch up to him. "It's bad me forgettin'. It's 'cause you're here, of course, and you had to go walk up old Vivian's butt and get a little kick and made me forget to watch. Look out!" He had turned and was looking over my shoulder to my rear, and his eyes grew wide. I half whirled, had a fleeting image of wings, huge wings, the wings of death, coming at my face, and then Harris grabbed my hair and threw me on my face out of the way. "You feathered pile of—" Harris was on his back, then on his hands and knees, then on his back, rolling over and over, beating at what looked like a giant ball of dust and feathers and wings. This broiling mass of dust and profanity moved in the direction of the granary, bounced across the wall. I saw an arm shoot out of the middle and grab a piece of board and start beating the feathers until the dust settled, and Harris was on his knees, holding the board with both hands, pounding on what seemed to be a tired feather duster on the ground. "Damn you, Ernie, I'll teach you to jump me that way." I had risen to my feet gingerly, half expecting some form of attack from a new direction, it hadn't been a good morning so far, and moved to see what Harris was beating on. My movement distracted Harris momentarily, and as he looked up there was a scurry of more dirt and feathers, and his enemy disappeared in a hole under the granary floor, but not before I could get a look at it. "A chicken?" I asked. "That was a chicken?" Harris stood, threw the board aside, and brushed the dirt from his pants. "Hell no, it's a rooster. Ernie. If you hadn't made me look up I would have killed him too. He's been working on me for years. I just hate it when I can't see him." I leaned down and peered under the granary, saw one yellow eye glaring back at me out of the darkness. "He's got to jump me by surprise. In a fair fight I can whip him, but when you can't see him, that's the only way he can get me." Now that the dust had settled, I saw that Harris was scratched and torn in several places on his chest and one cheek. "You're bleeding." He wiped the blood off. "It's his spurs. He gets to raking with them and it cuts some. I'd like to kill the old thing, but Pa, he likes Ernie. Says he's good to keep the hawks and owls away." I could believe that. I didn't know anything about hawks and owls, but I was sure I wasn't going to tangle with him.